Hello everyone, I am Anusha Chaudhry and I will be exploring refugee rights through the theme of refugee women. The topic of my presentation is refugee women, most vulnerable of the vulnerable. Through the course of my presentation, I will walk you through the main challenges faced by refugee women, but will primarily focus on psychosocial problems and how they make these women vulnerable. According to UNHCR, refugee women and girls made up over half of the 65.3 million refugees worldwide by June 2016, and the number is growing. However, refugee women's needs are not a top priority while rationing humanitarian supplies, which has led to significant marginalization of this group. There are four broad categories of factors that are inextricably linked, which make refugee women more vulnerable than any other refugee group. These categories are economic uncertainty, political factors, psychosocial factors, and sociological factors that are of utmost importance. Now, let's briefly take a look at the economic factors first, as they impact psychosocial factors and explain a lot of sociological experiences of refugee women. Being a refugee means loss of employment for these women. In most cases, especially in the case of Afghan refugees, men were the primary breadwinners of the family. War and exodus meant a loss of many male family members, which left behind a lot of widows and women who were traditionally confined within the house. For women in these circumstances, the challenge is twofold. Firstly, to gain job worthy skills, and secondly, to look for suitable employment, which is hard in case of being a refugee. Furthermore, the troubles of refugee women are mostly augmented by traditional division of labor in most underdeveloped countries such as Afghanistan and Iraq. Women in these societies mostly perform household chores that are not rewarded financially and have little or no professional expertise, barring a minority of women who work in professional roles. Hence, it is difficult for these women to suddenly look for well paying jobs after they have become refugees. Another problem faced by refugee women is low wages and exploitation related to wages or working hours. Most employers in host countries are aware of the fact that refugee women do not have a permanent living status in the country and do not have any bargaining power, and hence do not qualify for permanent jobs. In addition, the dire financial need forces them to accept menial jobs and meager salaries in addition to inhuman working hours. Moreover, the situation of refugee women is complicated by their induction in informal economy. For example, Afghan refugee women in Pakistan were forced to collect garbage and work as housemaids because, firstly, they lacked professional skills, and secondly, they could easily be coerced to perform any task due to financial hardship. As a result, women in these situations are unaccounted for in national and international statistics and are unlikely to receive humanitarian aid. Now let's move on to the political factors that make refugee women more vulnerable than men. The primary disadvantage that refugee women face is the fact that politics is primarily male dominated and women are underrepresented. This leads to more male centered policies and leads to the problem of inadequate resources being rationed for more than half of the refugee population, which is women. Furthermore, these women mostly lack political know how even in their home countries and do not have any effective means of lobbying for their rights, especially in a crisis situation where they do not know who to approach. Now, let's take a detailed look at the social and mental health issues faced by refugee women that marginalize them further. The most important thing that impacts refugee women's mental health is the breakdown of family ties and estrangement from blood relations, which includes husbands, sons, and close relatives. The emotional trauma associated with this can result in mental health problems such as post traumatic stress disorder, as well as leads to issues such as social exclusion in camps. Another issue that impacts the mental health of refugee women is intimate partner violence faced by these women at the hands of their husbands and male relatives. In the face of economic adversity, this abuse may increase in intensity and frequency and creates further psychosocial problems for these women and makes them more vulnerable. One of the most pressing issues facing refugee women is rape and sexual violence while migrating and in camps. Refugee women are often molested on their journey away from persecution by immigration officers and other administrative personnel, as suggested by Martin in his book titled Women, Migration, and Conflict. Due to economic constraints, these women are forced into sexual servitude in return for necessities of life, such as food. Trafficking and prostitution is another major problem that is created for refugee women on the road to freedom from persecution. This is further aggravated by loopholes in the trafficking protocol, which, as suggested by Martin, I quote, recognizes persons who are trafficked as victims but does not recognize the harms inflicted on them as human rights violations, unquote. Trafficking protocol leaves women more vulnerable, as it puts individuals at the mercy of states to either consider them eligible for humanitarian aid and relief and settlement, or repatriate them because their basic human rights have technically not been violated, just tampered with. An in-depth look into the situation of refugee women reveals the problem of meager reproductive health facilities available to these women and the prevalence of sexually transmitted diseases in refugee camps. A pertinent example in this case is the lack of contraception and negligible reproductive health facilities available to Afghan women in Pakistani camps, where medicines were sold in black markets by administrative individuals, and Afghan women were left vulnerable to disease and maternal mortality. In such cases, women are much more vulnerable than men, as the pressures of childbirth and pregnancy are augmented by lack of appropriate health care. Now, an analysis of the insufficiency of humanitarian efforts reveals that the foremost reason for gaps in refugee women's needs and availability of relief options stems from the loophole in trafficking protocol discussed above, as it does not explicitly regard sexual violence as violation of human rights. Hence, refugee women do not qualify for relief, citing this reason. Secondly, needs of women are always perceived as a second priority, and relief programs are mostly male centered, with policymakers and administrators who are mostly men as well. Men are almost certainly appointed as chaperones in this scenario to look after women and children. This makes women more vulnerable than men and leaves them at the mercy of men. Well, this highlights an important aspect of sociological power relations, which is the aspect of patriarchy and the fact that women are conditioned to be docile to male head of the family and elders. Hence, in this case, men and women both perpetuate patriarchy, which pushes refugee women to the margins of society. Another noteworthy barrier to accessing humanitarian aid is the language barrier and customs, such as parda or veil, observed by many refugee women from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. These women cannot put their needs in clear words in front of officials, even in the presence of interpreters, and much is lost in translation. Hence, due to this glitch, they are unable to fully receive what they deserve. Moreover, in some situations, veil prohibits them from interacting with locals, which creates another barrier to assimilation. Now, moving on to the discussion of sociological factors, rape is used in times of war and adversity to inflict emotional and mental anguish upon women. In a refugee setting, it has particular sociological significance, as it implies destroying the enemy psychologically. As corroborated by Friedman, and I quote, rape is used as a weapon to demoralize the enemy, especially in those societies where women are a symbol of honor, unquote. Hence, the sociological perspective on rape implies gaining victory over the enemy by manipulating control of women's bodies, thus making refugee women feeling less empowered and feeling less in control over their sexuality. This leads me to my next point of virginity being highly valued in some societies. Apart from Orthodox Christianity, Islamic societies also place considerable emphasis on a woman's virginity as a symbol of chastity and purity. So, raping refugee women in case of Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan would achieve the purpose highlighted by Friedman in the treatise on rape and domestic violence. In these societies, virginity is linked to marriageability, and young virgins are preferred for marriage due to the inherently patriarchal nature of these societies. So, for refugee women from these societies who have suffered from the trauma of rape, another burden of loss of chastity haunts them, which makes them more vulnerable to further abuse and marginalization. Another interesting point of analysis is the fact that due to their condition in camps and detention centers, refugee women can be compared to Edward Said's Orient, who is the far flung unknown exotic being. This construction is obviously man made, and in the case of refugee women, it is perpetuated by the media and popular culture through imagery and portrayal of refugee women as being at the mercy of others. This is obviously due to an interplay of sociological power relations where refugee women are at the receiving end and are looked upon as a burden to be looked after by the society at large. Moving on to how the refugee women's situation can be mitigated. Firstly, I believe that international aid agencies need to move beyond the rhetoric of data collection and take more practical and concrete steps to empower refugee women and make them self reliant. Refugee women should have a voice in policy making regarding refugees. The new approach should move from aid induced dependence to promoting self reliance in the long run. An example would be the integration of Afghan refugee women into the garment industry in Pakistan and introduction of microfinance facilities for refugee women. Refugee women should be given incentives to study and work as a move to empower them. Furthermore, quotas and employment and adequate representation in politics need to be set as corrective measures in the short term until this purpose is achieved. This is something even local women in first world countries such as Australia do not enjoy. This is in line with Article 4 of the CEDAW Convention, which calls for temporary special measures until women empowerment and equality is achieved. Refugee women definitely fall within this ambit once they are accepted as refugees in the host country. In addition, instead of local governance, international surveillance should be placed in camps and detention centers, which ensures that all international obligations are met at ground level and states do not dodge their commitments. Now, in terms of soft measures, comprehensive refugee packs should be handed over to refugee women on arrival, which highlight their rights and contain important contact information in case of need, for example, health facilities, reporting harassment, etc. Now, for the above measures to be successful, a few steps have to be taken. Firstly, governments and media outlets need to make serious efforts towards de-orientalizing local mindset, either through advertisement campaigns or educational institutions. A paradigm shift is needed from thinking about the refugee woman as some exotic being who is uncivilized and chasing state benefits to people whose human rights have been violated and they need help to rise above the margins of society. Finally, psychological indoctrination of refugee women is needed to decondition them regarding their perceptions of rape and how it mutilates their chastity and scars them for life. Indian feminist activist and author Kamla Bhasin has brilliantly put this in the following words, and I quote, "If anyone loses their honor when a woman is raped, it is the rapist, not the woman who was raped." Unquote. Now, this is the kind of approach that is needed to address psychosocial issues faced by refugee women so that they strive to overcome economic and social barriers to success. With this, I conclude my presentation and now I'm open to questions. Please have a look at the bibliography at the end. Thank you.